Welcome back to the Total Confidence Podcast. I am so excited. I have a very, very special guest, very, very unique guest. I just had this feeling like I met you in California and we really didn't get to engage in deep conversation.
Right.
But I just had this feeling. I told Milton that my good friend Milton, mutual friend, Enneagram teacher, host of the Do It for the Gram podcast. Anyway, I said, I got this feeling, man. Something just telling me to reach out to Jessica. And he said, yeah, do that. You know what I mean? She's brilliant. And then I started going through your podcast and I was like, oh, okay, yes. So I have with me today, Jessica Denise Dickson, life empowerment coach, Enneagram guide, trainer, speaker, freedom creatrix, and host and founder of the Antiracist podcast. Welcome to Total Confidence Podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. And yeah, Milton is a wonderful connector, and I'm grateful. That he was the kind of reason that we connected. I'm glad that he vouched for me.
Absolutely, you're one of his best friends, and so I'm happy to be with you. So I said a few things about you, but I'm going to ask you, who is Jessica Denise Dickson?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. It's interesting because my mother died recently. And one of the things that I feel like I'm wrestling with, or not even wrestling with, but grappling with, is that being part of who I am now. I am now someone whose mother is dead. That's a part of me. And there's times when it feels like the only important thing about me. And I know that it's also not. It is an important thing, and it's not the most important thing or the only important thing. And it's just an interesting time to kind of live through that and try to reconcile what it really means now, or who I really am now as someone whose mother is dead. So that's one thing about me. At the time of this recording, she died almost 4 weeks ago. So it's still really fresh for me. I am a Black woman descended from the enslaved on both sides of my family. I am an Enneagram 8 and always open to recognizing that maybe I'm mistyped, and hope that everyone who is listening to this is open to the idea of being mistyped and isn't clinging to their type like it is some kind of holy grail or magic thing that will save them. What else about me? I love the work that I get to do. I know you mentioned I have this Antiracist Enneagram podcast, and I'm about to run a training program, which I'm pushing back a little bit just because of my mom's death. But my passion is really helping people understand that we all, regardless of where we are in the world, we all have an inner world that our Enneagram type helps us understand. You know, the motivations of our type, the reactivity of our type. We all have that happening all the time. So we have core fears, core desires. You know, we have existential threats that make us react, and we all have that. We also have all gone through a socialization process. And so we know no matter where we are, who we are. And so this is a process where we learn the right way, the quote, right way to be in the world. We learn our roles. We learn the values of a culture. We learn the beliefs and opinions and attitudes. We learn based upon my identity, what can I do? What shouldn't I do? We learn who are the natural or quote best leaders. we also learn who aren't leaders, who are the worker bees, who are the people who shouldn't be in leadership or have power. We learn a lot of things about the world, both what we sense is just or unjust. Sometimes we think that comes, from a sense of ourself, but often that comes from our socialization. So we all go through a socialization process where we internalize at a pre-verbal level the culture, the rules of the culture. And what matters about it being at the pre-verbal level is that it shows up at the subconscious level, just like our Enneagram type does. It shows up as norms and as kind of just the way things are for us. And so we don't think to question them because it's just how things are. But, part of why I love the work that I do is I get to help people find language for those things and understand then how both our Enneagram types, motivations and sensitivities, how those things pattern our nervous system, as well as how our socialization patterns our nervous system, and are always moving us, in a way to uphold the status quo to make sure that we are safe. And, I really believe that, we can know something in our mind, but until we know something in our body, until we have a nervous system reality around that, it's really hard to create change, even when we're doing Enneagram work, right? Enneagram work is beautiful, but it can get really intellectual really quickly, where we get stuck in the talking about it. And we can think that talking about it is actually the same as making change. And, for me, doing 3-centered work that actually allows us both personal freedom and collective freedom is the way forward. So I love, one of the things that's true about me is that I love being able to guide people in that work, in doing their own healing. Sometimes I'm like, do I call myself a healer or not? Because what I do is hold space for people to find truth that leads them into freedom and liberation. And often that comes with healing. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Beautiful, beautiful. How did you come to find the Enneagram? And what was your first impression when you came across it?
So in 2013, I was looking for a professional development tool to use. I worked in higher education at the time, and I was a supervisor, and I was about to lead a retreat. And I was like, okay, I was in my late 20s. Some of the people who I was supervising were 2 to 3 times older than me. And I felt like I needed to come correct with something. And we had done things like True Colors and the Myers-Briggs and Strengths. And I was just like, I need something fresh, something that's going to, I wanted to be impressive in some way. I wanted them to leave with something that they could take home. And so I did a Google search. And a Google search is the thing that brought me to a PDF about the Enneagram. And I loved it because it felt like it wasn't just blowing smoke up your what. It was like, okay, these are some of the good things, or some things that might be true about your type that are good, but also like, here are the pitfalls. Here are the things that you need to watch out for. And for me, the opportunity for that level of authenticity and truth felt amazing, like really prescient and within me, and I wanted to be able to give that. So I led a retreat around it, and I fell in love. That summer I probably read 20 Enneagram books, if not more. I just like dove really into it, which gave me the chance to kind of see, okay, what might be some fringe things. Like there's some things that most teachers agree upon. When they're teaching the Enneagram, they might teach it a little bit differently, but there are things that are like, this is the core of what the type is. And then there are things that are a specific teacher's interpretation of the type, or something that might be like descriptive, of one person's experience of the type. And often what I found with people that I think is something to watch out for is that we read a description and we think, oh, okay, this is what a type 6 is supposed to look like.
Yes, yeah.
And if I'm not fitting in with all the ways that a type 6 is supposed to look like, then I must not be a 6, right? And I hear that from people. And it took me a while to find my type as an 8 because many of the descriptions just sounded like white men in power. And I was like, I don't have the privilege to show up like this. Like, I would be fired. People would have a problem with me. People would complain about me. And while people do complain about white men, there's also still the, oh, wow, he's kind of a, you know what, but he did good work. And so a lot of things are more easily excused in people who hold that identity than they are in someone like me. And so my journey with the Enneagram became deeper the more I started to lead people in the work, because I worked with diverse populations. And some of the questions were always like, well, is this me or is this my culture? How do I know the difference between those two things? And, those are important questions. Those are important things to be able to sort through and sift through. Like, if you come from a collectivist culture and you see yourself as your culture in many ways, that's going to impact how you look at the Enneagram or the work of the Enneagram, or yourself as an individual doing kind of your own work.
Right.
And so there's all those things that I just love the nuance of them. But I really saw the power of being able to see yourself in a type and being able to have the language to say, this is the inner experience that I was having when this was going on, or this was the thing that was motivating me, or this is the way that I was caught up. And then being able to do the work of, saying okay, do I want this? Or is it time to transform it? Sometimes people are like, oh, I'm this and that. And I'm like, okay, well, why? You don't like it. It's not serving you. And yet you're not doing anything about it. It's always very confusing. So I think that I fell in love with the Enneagram. I just fell in love with its potential. And then I remember when I first became a coach, I left higher ed and I was like, all right, I'm an Enneagram coach. And I would start to have conversations with people about how their identity shaped their Enneagram type's expression. And that triggered a whole lot of white men. White men are like, what does race have to do? What is gender? And those things don't have anything to do with the Enneagram. And, so for me, going back to what I stated earlier, if we're not actually having conversations about the ways that we're shaped by our culture and the ways that societal dynamics actually impact who we are and how we show up, it's going to limit the work of the Enneagram that we can actually do. Because a white man who has societal power, that mixes in then with the Enneagram 8 power dynamic of I want to be the one who's in charge. And often white men are the ones who get put in charge, right? So all of those things are working for white men in a way that women and women of color, are considered a bitch. We're looked at as someone who is a threat to a system, instead of someone who has their own sense of power and their own sense of strength. They're just we are seen as something to get rid of, someone to get rid of. And so, that's been a little bit of my professional journey, and it has been very interesting. Yeah.
I can only imagine. You have a master's degree in counseling.
In counseling, yep.
What led you down that path? What inspired you to go take that route in life?
I always knew that I wanted to help people. And I had this experience when I was in middle school. So our two people broke into our house when I was in middle school, and my mom was attacked.
Wow.
And we went to therapy after that, family therapy, and there was some like kids therapy. And now looking back on it, I'm like, okay, the therapist, I think, did what they should have done, which is like, this is, kind of follow up with the parents after me and my brother had our own time. Yeah. But what happened actually was that my dad kind of like threw the things that we said to our therapist back in our face. Wow. In a way that was like kind of invalidating of our experience. Yeah. And I was like, I never want to be a therapist who leads someone to feel invalidated. And so that kind of drove me. I wasn't exactly sure what it looked like, but I knew I wanted to help people. And then I decided that it was important for me to, get a master's degree in either social work or counseling or something. So I got a school counseling degree, and it was great. I worked only in the schools for a year, though, before being I was laid off actually because of budget cuts. It was like last in, first out, bye. So I had to figure out what I wanted to do. And I was applying for a lot of jobs in a lot of different places. And then higher ed really just kind of called to me. And so I got an entry-level position in residence life and was able to use all of the skills that I got from my program to, help develop the people that I supervised and the students who I had a responsibility for within my communities there.
Beautiful. I went and listened to several of your podcasts, and which I really enjoyed. And I was telling Milton, the type 8 energy mixed with the intellectual part is just like a force, it's just captivating to me. It's like, so I really, really enjoyed listening to your podcast.
I'm so glad. Thank you.
And one of your podcasts, you talked about how you were accused growing up as talking like a white girl.
Oh, yeah.
And what impact did that have on you? And, and I say this because you're not the only one, yeah. And there are things internally in the Black community we got to work out that we kind of just like accept as norms and everything. So,
amen.
How did that impact you then? And how did you grow to accept yourself?
Yeah. So I think then I was just who I was. And it made no sense that I was any less Black because of the way that I spoke. But it gave me this sense that maybe I don't belong. Maybe I'm not Black enough. Maybe there's something wrong with me. And I struggled with that for a while, especially being in mixed spaces that were very Black and white, I just wasn't sure that I actually belonged in Black spaces. And I definitely didn't belong in white spaces. Mm-hmm. So it created this thing within me where I just really wasn't sure if I was lovable, if I was enough, if I was worthy of care and, all of those things. It created a lot of imposter syndrome within me. And as I got older, what I came to realize was it's not really that I sound like a white girl as much as people aren't sure if I'm going to show up and uphold whiteness.
Can you expound on that? Wow,
yeah, it's like, okay, I talk the way I talk, and people, a lot of Black people, if you're not Black, sorry, if this is a secret to you, we put on a voice that might sound a little bit more white when we're answering the phone so that people won't see us as a threat. Yeah. It's a thing that happens in it's called like your professional, quote, professional voice, but it really is just the voice that sounds the whitest to be the least threatening. Yeah. And what I've just realized is like when I meet someone who talks like a white girl, I don't know if they're going to uphold whiteness, and whiteness upholds itself violently. So I actually don't know when I meet someone who talks white, if they're going to be on my side, if there's going to be solidarity, if there's going to be care, or if there is going to be me being thrown under the bus because they're upholding whiteness. And that is something that I only in the past few years came to actually really understand, that it's not necessarily so much about how I speak. People might make a joke about that and move on when they know that I actually am, supportive of the struggles that Black people go through. But it was really that people weren't sure. People weren't sure if I was showing up as a white girl who looked Black, who wanted to uphold whiteness, or if I was going to show up as a Black person who just, spoke the way that I spoke, but was still actually understood the concerns and the cares of Black people. And so when I realized that, I was able to kind of like let go of some of that, because it was like, oh, this doesn't matter nearly as much as I thought that it did.
Yeah.
But then it's like, okay, so how do I, this is probably part of my social instinct, right? Like, how do I actually signal to people that I'm not going to uphold whiteness? Like, how do I make sure that people know, that Black people know that when I'm in their space, that I'm actually for them? Because when they're just, kind of on the outskirts and they're not sure, it's not their responsibility to make sure I'm safe. It's actually mine.
So how do you do that?
A lot of it is just like actually connecting with people, making sure that I'm slowing down. I can feel sometimes like I also am not really into pop culture, so I can feel very out of the loop of a lot of things. And before I probably would have like run away or been like, oh, this place isn't for me. This just isn't for me, like, okay, I'm not whatever enough. But lately, over the past years or even decade, I would say it's been more like, I don't know what this is, but I'm going to stay and enjoy it. I'm going to learn something right now because I don't know, because I don't know about most pop culture things anyway. Yeah. Do I care about them? Not necessarily, but I do care about the ways that they connect me to other people.
Yeah.
And when I realized that that was the thing that was important, it helped me just slow down to be able to be with people instead of the fear of like, I don't belong here, so I gotta go,
Yeah.
Which, is when you don't feel like you belong, of course you're gonna want to leave, right? Like there's only so much that you can take, that your heart can take around feeling like people are gonna reject you.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really beautiful to like to when you don't feel like you're safe to leave. And there's an opportunity, right, to cultivate relationship and to just be connected with people and to say, no, I don't know what that is. And I'm happy to learn. I'm happy to be a part of this in some way. And also recognizing part of my journey was working at a historically Black college.
Okay.
And I think that was a really important thing for me because honestly, there are so many different ways to be Black. And I realized that my form of I was one of my students said, you know what? You're really weird, but I feel safe with you. Because I was just like the one with the big hair, and I would listen to Broadway tunes and just belt to my heart's desire in my office. I was always singing, and I was just being who I am.
Yeah.
I was just being who I am. And when I got that feedback, it was a reminder to me that I don't have to perform Blackness. I didn't have to do that. That wasn't what people were asking from me. And so I get to just be who I was, enjoy the things that aren't necessarily my things that people do who are Black, and that's okay. Like, I'm not going to get Beyonce tickets. It's not a thing for me. I'm okay with that, and if people want to have that kind of judgment. Like, no, we can rock out, I'll dance, we can sing, but it's just, that doesn't make me any less anything.
Yes.
Any less human, any less Black, any less worthy of being part of, a Black community, and so I think when I saw all of the, I saw like the nerdy Black kids, and I saw like the cooler, more athletic Black kids, and I was like, oh, yeah, there's something for everyone, and I'm not for everyone, right? And I don't need to be for everyone, and I can be for the people who I am for, who just need to come because they know that I'm going to be weird, and just being who I am, because I am a little weird and I'm okay with that. But I loved that. That was like it was a position that felt really special to me, was being able to I'm just going to be who I am, and you can come and you can be who you are. And whatever ways that you feel like you have to try to fit in, maybe you don't. Maybe you just get to be loved fully for who you are. And who you are is what makes you belong, not anything that you do or don't do.
That's beautiful, because and I think it's important, because we can easily be seduced into, I'm just so different, Black people don't relate to me, and just kind of drift, what I'm saying, away from who we are, and just kind of be just accept, I don't know, just being completely removed from who we are.
Yeah.
Out of that, not figuring out how to navigate those things, So that's beautiful. You had that experience too, that being at the Black college like that, and being grounded like that.
And I want to say that was an important part of what changed around, like, you sound like a white girl, you talk like a white girl. Now, I hear the same thing. You sound like a Valley girl. Okay. But the big difference for me is that I've been actively doing work to dismantle whiteness.
That's what I wanted to ask you, because I went to Milton and Chelsea's workshop at the IEA conference, and I had no idea what to expect. Yeah. And when they broke down whiteness.
Wait, you didn't come to mine? No, I'm not offended. I'm not offended.
The thing about it is, it's always like two workshops I wanted to go to.
I know.
Time, and I'm like, oh my God. So yeah, then I had relationships with people.
It was a lot.
Like, oh my God, do I go here? Do I be politically correct, or do I go to this one? So I missed your workshop. Yeah. So
sorry, you were going. I interrupted you.
No, you good. But I got you here. So whiteness, as a social, how do they define it as I'm not saying it right, but what is whiteness?
Yeah. So when I say whiteness, I talk about it as a social construct. A social construct and a race. So I want to say that it's a social construct, and I also want to say that actually makes it something that's real and tangible. A lot of people are like, oh, it's just a social construct, so that means it's not real. And social constructs are things that are in place that actually are a lived reality for us. So whiteness as a race came about in the way that we know it now, when slavery was legal, and it created Black as a way to prevent Black people from getting power when they were freed from enslavement, to stop intermarrying between races, between Black and white people, specifically. Yeah. There was less around Black people being with Indigenous people. It's what created that when babies were born, they were actually born to their owner, not to the mother, which allowed them to be able to be sold at any time. So these are things, this is a construct that is inherently anti-Black in its foundations. And so white-bodied people, however, are socialized, that process that we go into, taking on culture, they're socialized to internalize whiteness as something that's both good, default, and neutral. So it's kind of like the most ideal, but it's also like the water we swim in, the air we breathe. It's the thing that we just don't notice because it's just the way things are. When you hear anyone talk about tradition, I think it's really important to look at where does that tradition come from, because it didn't come from nothing. Right. There was a time when a people decided to do this tradition for a reason, for a specific reason. And so our traditions aren't benign. They all come from somewhere. They all come from something that leads to upholding some cultural norm in some way, right? And so it's important for people who are white-bodied to really look and see, like, how have I been shaped by believing that whiteness is the ideal? And how does that lead to others being looked at as savages? Yeah. Or, all of the things that, Black and Indigenous and, brown people have been facing for a long time. We are seen as less than because we're not white enough. Yeah. And so part of, and no one came here white. People came here British, English, Italian, and, had to give up some part of themselves to actually become white. And it's important for us to look and see, like, was it worth it? What does it really, do for me to uphold whiteness? What parts of myself have I lost? What parts of my ancestors have I lost because of it? And it's important even for people of color and Black people to look at, how have I internalized whiteness? Because, I often don't use the term white supremacy, because white supremacy is a delusion. There's no white person who's more supreme than another person. Supremacy is like to be over, right? Like at the root, it's like it's higher than another thing. And no, that's a delusion. It's upheld. Any supremacy of whiteness is upheld through violence, emotional, psychological, physical, spiritual violence that came from literally breaking people down, invalidating people, dehumanizing people. Yes. And so when I talk about whiteness, I talk about it like that. And it's really important for any of us who actually say we want freedom, including those who are just doing their simple old Enneagram work. If you actually say you really want healing and you really want freedom, and you're not doing the work to dismantle whiteness, it's going to be something that is going to, here's what I'll say. We want to make sure that our Enneagram work is not just leading us to look more like a white person. Wow. I talk about the good white person. Then there's something that I call the good white person portfolio, which is all the ways that you're good. It's all the ways that you're nice and kind, and the Black friend that you had over for dinner last week. It's all of those things that your grandfather, uncle, cousin marched with Dr. King. It's all of those things that are part of the good white person portfolio. Yeah. And, so upholding like the good white person persona becomes really important, to the white person. But we don't want our work to lead people to looking like the good white person persona. Wow. We want real, full wholeness, real, true freedom. And so I always use the example of, an Enneagram 8, because that's my type. And I don't like to pick at other people. So, an Enneagram 8, who is a white male, is going to have some of the same work as me as a Black female. Mm-hmm. It's important for us to look at how we're related to power. It's important for us to look at what is vulnerability. Where am I vulnerable now, and what vulnerability am I avoiding? Those kinds of things. Always. It's going to be important for any Enneagram 8, regardless of identity, to look at those things, right? But when doing the work, it actually also becomes important for those who do have privilege to be able to say, okay, I actually can wield my type to uphold privilege for myself.
Right.
And is getting more privilege actually healing? Is that transformation? I don't think that it is. And so, in our presentation at the IEA conference, one of the things that I talked about was, the levels of health, and how when Don Riso was creating those, he really wanted us to grow them. He didn't want them to stay as they were. He spent a lot of time developing them, but he believed that as we grew as an Enneagram community in our knowledge and in our practice, that those would change. And I think that people have then clung to them, and they look and they see the level 3, which is like, there's like healthy, average, and unhealthy. So 1 through 3 healthy, and so on. And the 3 per level. So people can look, and if you look at some of the descriptions of those levels of development, it's like financially proficient, and these things. I'm like, oh, so having more privilege, having wealth privilege is what you're telling me is what health is for type.
Right.
And so I would say that it's not. I would say that if it's only an individual thing and it's not a collective thing, if it's only for us and for my benefit, if my healing work is my transformation work isn't changing my community, then something is surely missing.
Wow. It leads you leading me. It's perfect segue into, you talked about the pseudo white awakening.
Oh yeah.
Around, and because I was confused, and so I'm glad you put words to that. I've been socially conscious my whole life. My dad was socially conscious, and it seemed like out of nowhere, white people was like, you know what? There is racism. You know what? There is like the scales fell off their eyes. And so when I heard you say that pseudo white awakening, can you expound on that? Because I was really confused at how just George Floyd and hundreds of years, but it was just this particular series of different events that just all of a sudden just kind of like,
Yeah, I think that it was a very special time that, some people awakened and are still in the awakening, and some people have gone right back to sleep.
Wow.
But during that time, we were a captive audience. It was a few months, we stayed home, right? We were home because of this global pandemic.
Right.
And we were still trying to figure out, our kids going back to school? How long are we going to be home? No one really knew. And then this happened, and there was nowhere to go.
Yeah.
There was nowhere to go. And I think that there was something powerful about watching this Black man lose his breath while we were all holding our own breath because of a global pandemic. I think that there was something about that time that it was like, wow, watching him cry out for his mom and then, take his last breath while we're all wondering, can I breathe? How will I catch COVID? How will it, and will it affect me? Will it kill me?
Yeah.
So I think that there was like I hate to call it a sweet spot, but it was like almost like a weak spot in the armor of white supremacy.
Yeah.
That it was like, able to get through. And I think what happened is that people went in with what I call white urgency, and they hit the ground running, thinking that the faster was better, and they burned themselves out.
Wow.
And this is why, when we're learning about whiteness and white supremacy and anti-racism and even our Enneagram work, there's a difference between talking about something and having the language for something and doing the work around it. And we have to always understand that if we're not doing the kind of work that changes our nervous system, nothing is going to change. So people were reading books voraciously and joining courses, but not necessarily doing the important nervous system work that uproots upholding whiteness as what is normal and safe. And without that nervous system work, our society is not going to change, because we don't have just an individual nervous system. Our nervous systems are actually connected with one another. And so if there's an overarching collective nervous system that still wants to uphold whiteness, and we're not doing the work ourselves to dismantle those norms from our system, it's going to be really hard to create change. And we have to understand that the mind goes so fast. I mean, I love head types because I'm just like, wow, you synthesize that so amazingly and so quickly. Yeah. But until we get down into the body, yes, this is why I talk about like 3-centered work is important for anti-racism. Because until you get down into the body and you're able to deal with what your nervous system knows, and, you know, even dealing with like, what does my gut say? I remember asking my first group program, and I was just asking, like, what does your body say, you know, to some of my coaching clients. And the reactivity that came up during that time in their nervous system, like, you want to know what like my body says about racism. There was so much like, it was just like, oh my God, okay, let's take a step back and just breathe for a minute.
Yeah.
But I think that our body is always telling us something. Our nervous system is always telling us something. Now, what our nervous system often lacks is time context and situational context. Because our nervous system is like the most, you know, our brain, that part of our brain it's the most primitive part. Its goal is literally just to make sure that we're safe. And it thinks that we stay safe by upholding the status quo, you know, but the things that we think of as safe, like it doesn't even necessarily occur to our nervous system as being the same. And so the nervous system becomes this really, really important key. And I think befriending our nervous system is important. Having a relationship with our nervous system. So we can say, oh, wow, you know, a white person who's doing work can say, okay, someone's talking about privilege or mentioned white people, and it triggered something in me. It got my nervous system all like in a tizzy. And you can actually say, but I am safe. I'm actually not unsafe. So I need to do the work to regulate myself so that I can stay in the conversation. And when those things start to happen, things like urgency, the things that burn people out with the pseudo awakening, you know, I think that was a missed opportunity, was the opportunity to slow down and to get things into the body and to really like embody the work, you know, in a way that I can be like, okay, I notice urgency is coming up, but I also know that these are long-term problems. You talked about it before, hundreds of years. And all of a sudden, and now what, you're going to be the savior of that thing? You're just going to, you're going to just like jump in with your superhero cape and take care of it all. Well, good for you, but that's actually not how it works. And so people need the space to change their nervous systems. And as we change our nervous system, we actually have less, what's the word I want to say? Tolerance for things that are oppressive. When we start to do work around our own perfectionism, for example, when other people try to project that we have to be perfect, they try to project perfectionism onto us, we get to take a step and say, actually, no. Actually, that's not the thing that's led me to freedom. So we're not going to do that. And I'm not going to allow that to happen. And we can slow down and really just be with our humanity. One of the things I said during the IEA conference that I've said before is that we don't heal our way out of our humanity. We actually heal our way into it. And so we were created as humans, and I grew up in a church context that, sometimes talked about that as a bad thing, that, we're a wretch and we're bad and we're naturally, horrible. And I kind of take issue with that interpretation of scripture. I won't get into that right now. That's a whole nother podcast episode.
we okay. We can go there in the future. You can go there. We can go there in the future. That's fine. Yeah.
But I do think that there's just this opportunity to slow down and be in the fullness of our humanity as we were created to be. Now, that doesn't mean anything perfect is ever going to happen, because perfectionism is not part of our humanity.
Yeah.
Unless we mean like that right now is perfect, that even with my mom gone, that there is perfection that is present, right? Like that doesn't feel great to me, and it still maybe is. And when we're with that part of our humanity, it gives us a more regulated stance to actually create change from. Because when we're not just like in this, a lot of our judgments are based in shame and guilt. And often we don't have a model though in our culture of being able to move through shame or being able to actually really deal with guilt. And so it just keeps us stuck in the same rut over and over and over and over and over.
Yes.
But when we start to actually learn to move through shame, that shame is not an identity and it was never meant to be. When we learn to actually feel it, because it means that we're human. It means that I impacted someone in a way that I didn't want to. It means that I showed up in a way that I'm not proud of. That's just part of our humanity, right? But when shame becomes who we are, what are we going to do? There's nothing to do when shame is who I am. When shame is just an experience that I have in the world that actually points me to something, then I have the opportunity to be a bigger version of myself rather than the shame that makes me feel like I have to shrink. I have to make myself small. I can't be all that I am. And I can't let people see me. And so we have an opportunity to really have this reclamation of the fullness of our humanity. And I think that that is really, really beautiful. And I think that understanding our Enneagram type is part of that. I think an anti-racist lens, like a foundation for understanding, whiteness and power dynamics and privilege, and understanding how those things have shaped and are shaping our nervous system, and then repatterning our nervous system, so that we can create a new culture with new norms. To me, that's like how we move forward. And it sounds beautiful and it feels beautiful.
I've never heard it put like that about the nervous system, but it makes sense because as a head type, of course, I struggle with intellectualizing things and not actually moving out in the world. And the social 5. Oh my God, when I read the complete Enneagram and she talked about the social 5, it's basically like we specialize in spiritual bypassing. And so getting in the body, I love what you're saying. It scares me, because it's just like, oh man, I got to do this every day. I got to do something physical every day, but it's good for me.
Well, I think one of the things too for 5s, I work with a lot of them and I love 5s, and there is just so much head energy. And when I think about, part of the Enneagram 5 is like my capacity to be with people, right? The defense mechanism is isolation, because y'all are overwhelming, right? Everyone, like things are just can be overwhelming really fast.
Yeah.
But the practice of actually getting down into the body, which is where a lot more energy lives, can be really supportive for the 5 because that head energy can burn out. And then you think that you have to produce something in your mind for someone when people don't just want your head energy, they want you and who you are and all of who you are, right? And so getting down in the body where there's actually more energy can be really helpful and nourishing for a 5 instead of just thinking I am a walking head.
Yeah.
It changes the game. So I just wanted to offer you that and say, yeah, it's hard. And there is something about a practice of getting into the body that's so good for the 5.
I appreciate that. That's I'm a runner.
Oh yeah.
Running, it's I'm out of my head and I'm, I feel alive. Like,
Yeah.
but I can really exist in here. Your anti-racist program, what led to you going in this direction?
Yeah.
And what has been the biggest challenges? What have been some of the biggest challenges?
Yeah.
Going in this direction?
Well, when George Floyd was murdered, I felt like God was like, hey, you need to do this anti-racist Enneagram work. And I first wasn't really down for it. I started my business because I believe that when Black women heal, that the world heals. And that's absolutely still true and still leads me. But I also realized that if white people aren't doing the work, that gives Black people no opportunity to actually flourish. Because again, whiteness upholds itself so violently. So all the dehumanization that Black women will face trying to be whole and vulnerable and, share all of who they are and be all of who they are, often that when you do that work, you get cut down in the world.
Yeah.
And so it was the thing that I was like, okay, but so I've been doing this work since 2020, and people have been asking me for years to do a certification program. And I don't think I'm in the place to do a certification program, but I did want people to have training. And so the program is called Embody Your Leadership. And it's an anti-racist Enneagram training program that covers the basics of the Enneagram, the basics of anti-racism, like what are the foundational things that we really need to know, and then the basics of the nervous system. Like, because part of it is that we want to embody who we are as a leader rather than perform leadership. Like leadership, some people think of leadership as a role or a title. And I think of it as something that we embody in who we are and then live. And so, leadership can be very performative, where we put on, like a suit, we put on the role of leader, and then we take it off when we're home.
Yeah, right.
I want us to be people who are leaders in whatever space that we're in. And that means being able to be with people as they are. So that Enneagram knowledge of being able to talk to someone and maybe just noticing that they're displaying a habit that a type 6 might have or a type 9 might have, and being able to be with them and get curious about them, getting curious about what their experience around that is. Do they feel resonance with one or the other? And also understanding that there's always these societal dynamics at play. And being able to practice. Liberation is a practice. It's something that we have to develop skill around. A lot of us actually don't listen very well. We aren't taught to listen well. And so one of the things that we talk about in this program and we practice is, how do we listen well? How do we get out of our own head? A lot of us, we wait and we're hoping for the thing that we can make a connection point around. Now, can that be helpful? Yes. Is it sometimes not? Yeah, sometimes it's not helpful. And are we present enough to be able to know when it is and when it's not? And so the anti-racism work and the liberation work is really about like practice, like practicing knowing, being able to discern between when someone is, again, for example, like talking about the work, first doing the work. We can really, as Enneagram coaches, we can like celebrate that someone has all the right words.
Right.
But it actually doesn't mean that they're doing anything.
Right.
So it's really getting those things, deep into our sense of self so that we can actually be leader. And, understanding the nervous system. We all have a nervous system, all of us.
Right.
And,
right.
There's like basics of it that I think are really important. And for us to be able to, when we're with someone and they might have like a freeze response or they might have a flight response, because we're not being chased by predators anymore, those things are going to be a lot more subtle. So our ability to be with the people that are right in front of us, I think is a gift. And it's a gift that I want to help people be able to offer everyone in their world. That's really kind of why I started, because it's like, wow, if I notice that you're in a flight response, because I notice that your shoulders move away from me and you tense up, then I can be like, hey, I'm just curious. It seemed like, something shifted. Do we need to pause for a moment? What would be most helpful for you? When we notice that, some people cross their arms because they're cold. Some people cross their arms just because they're comfortable. But often when someone quickly crosses their arms and sits back, that can be a sign that someone is uncomfortable or feels unsafe.
Right.
So it's those little things that we're able to just be like, okay, is everything all right? What's going on with you? Because a lot of those things happen on such a subconscious level. But when, as leaders, as people who want to be leaders in the world, we get to be the people who create cultures of safety that say, like, I'm not going to overstep or bypass the fact that you look uncomfortable. No, I'm actually going to address it. And I'm going to be present with you for whatever it is. It might be that I phrase something in a way that was really trash because it triggered you.
Yeah.
It could be many, many things, right? And so giving people the opportunity to develop their own leadership and to be able to understand, like, you don't have to be an Enneagram coach for this to be a powerful thing for you. I like to say that I tend to work with people who are culture shapers and culture shifters. And this is the kind of work that changes culture, to be able to slow down, to get a feel on what the individual and collective nervous system is around something, to be able to look and see what are the things that are really foundationally grounded in whiteness that we actually get to do the work of dismantling. And then, how is my Enneagram type's reactivity popping up to create both change? Our Enneagram type can do good things, and it can really get us caught up. We can get really caught up, and it can be a barrier to us actually growing and moving forward.
Absolutely.
And so I want us to have that holistic, really picture and way of being in the world that says, like, I am a leader and I care. And I'm going to make sure that I'm present with you and however you show up, and giving people the space to just show up how they show up, to be who they are without us having to put our judgment on it. I like to say that curiosity triumphs over judgment. And I borrow from the Bible, from scripture with that. And I think that it's really important that we understand that when we maybe feel like there is something that we judge, we can practice curiosity. Where did that come from? Who taught me that this was something that I should judge? Oh, was it the thing that my grandma said? Was it the society? Was it something that happened when I was in grade school and I watched someone get punished for that? And so therefore it taught me that I should never do it ever. It's those little things. And I think that for me, the opportunities are so big and so important to pursue.
Yeah, I think your work is important because the Enneagram is intellectualized so much, and I'm listening and I'm really intrigued because culturally speaking, there's a lot of shame in our culture as Black
Mhm.
Americans, a lot of fear, and as adults, we're just afraid of again for survival tactics under.
Yeah.
I know you don't like the term white supremacy, but under the system as in
Yeah.
survival, not sticking your head, not being who you are, not being bold, you know, shrinking and getting small. So I'm listening to you and you talk about the embodiment and exploring those things. That is really, really important and
Yeah.
understated in this work. So you have a very important, I don't need to tell you that, but wow, I just see like, wow, okay, this is real deal. And especially for, it's for everybody, but especially as a Black man, I'm like, yeah, definitely, tapping into those things that culturally is not cool to explore,
Yeah.
fear
Yeah.
and that. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm gonna be respectful of your time. You have to come back. I mean, I can't
I
make
would
you come
love
back.
to. I would love to.
So my last question to you is, what has been the most rewarding part of doing this work for you? Like, is there any moments that have stuck out in particular that, like, okay, I know I'm on the right course. This is, this is, this is where it's at.
I think it's when my clients realize that they actually have the power to change things. I primarily work with women, people socialized female, and with white women. And, in the Black community, Black women are seen as strong and capable and competent and powerful in our own right, in a way that white culture does not uphold women in that way.
Right.
And so there's a lot of shrinking and making themselves small. And as they're doing the work, this beautiful work on themselves and in their space, them being able to see like, oh, I actually don't have to tolerate this thing. That's a cultural norm. That I actually can shift culture with my presence by showing up differently, by asking different questions. And those times when they realize that and they step up and they change their family culture and they change the culture of their workplaces or of their schools, that to me is so one of the most fulfilling and beautiful things that I can see. Because I'm like, it's not easy to be someone who is a change maker and to choose it, but to choose it from a regulated place, from a place of, where the nervous system's regulated and you realize that you're actually whole already and that nothing can take it away from you. It's a game changer. It changes so much and it's beautiful to watch. So that's probably for me is how I answer that.
Wow. Wow. I'm my mind is blown, and I'm not just saying that because I'm standing in front of you like I'm really like, okay, I got to get in this body. When you talked about the nervous, I have to explore that because I don't want to be a talking head, an Enneagram, it's easy to default into that. So I really, really appreciate you taking this time to talk, especially in light of everything that you're dealing with. My condolences.
Thank
Pray
you.
that, you and your family find peace in this time.
Thanks. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me. It means so much.
Thank you. This is Total Confidence Podcast. It's Jessica Denise Dickson. How can we learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, I would say come over to my Instagram. I'm taking things slowly, kind of dipping my toes back into work at this time. And I know that work's going to pick up in a little bit. So I have a few things that I'm working on that will support you if you're not ready for like the longer 10-month program that I'll be starting soon. So keep your eyes out. My work is always about how can we apply this to our world and to our nervous systems to make actual long-lasting, sustainable change. And so that's what you'll get when you come be with me. And some people aren't ready for that. And I recognize that as well. But you might be more ready than you think. So just come along and join me on Instagram at Jessica D. Dickson Coaching. And I'll see you there.
Thank you so much. This is Totem Confidence Podcast. Jessica Denise Dickson. Safe travels to you. And looking forward to talking to you again.
Well, same.